Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast, where we discuss a mainstream movie and a non-mainstream movie that are thematically linked, sort of. This time we have John Carpenter's fairly well-known Prince of Darkness with a fairly large cast, and then we have the English thriller horror film Raw Meat. It was released in the US under the title Deathline. It is from 1972, and Prince of Darkness is from much later in the game, 1987, I believe. Yep, 1987. So we're going to talk about these two films. What do they have in common? Donald Pleasence. It is an evening of Pleasence here at Cult and Classic Podcast. He's one of my favorite actors. Listeners will probably recognize him most regularly as Dr. Loomis from the vast majority of the early Halloween films. His voice is flippin' stellar. Mystery Science Theater fans will especially recognize him as the villain in The Puma Man, which stands as one of the worst films they ever did and one of the best episodes they ever did, in my humble opinion. So we're going to dive in first with Prince of Darkness, but of course I need to introduce our panelists. Greg Johnson is here. How are you doing, Greg?
I'm just auditing this particular episode, so don't count on me. Yeah.
Non-pro credit, pass, fail next term.
Yeah.
We have with us Mandy Longley. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm also just dialing it in this week.
We've got some things to talk about this episode, and I was a little... So usually when I pick these films, I try and pick a film that's fairly well-received by critics, or at least genre critics, and another film that is lesser known and may or may not have a higher recognition and higher reviews. In this case, both these films sit fairly high. We're talking like 6 to 8, depending out of 10, depending on which aggregates and which reviewers you're looking at. But I was expecting something a little different. So we're going to talk about that, and I don't know if everybody else will feel the same way. But first, we're going to start with Prince of Darkness. This is a large cast film. It's John Carpenter's first independently financed film since I think it was Escape from New York. He was tired of working for studios. He wanted more control over this one. So he rounded up some of his favorite people that he'd worked with. And it also is his return to horror. He did Starman before this. And then right before this, he did Big Trouble in Little China, which is, of course, a cult classic and much loved, but it didn't do well in the box office. So studios were kind of frustrated, and they wanted more control into what he was going to do. And he said, no, I'm going to do this my own way. The plot is that this old monk dies, or this old, rather, Catholic priest dies, and Donald Pleasence's character is just known as the priest in the movie. He then gets a note and a key from this guy, and he discovers that this dead priest was the last in the line of old-timey priests who'd been essentially hiding in, at this point, it's in, I guess, New York, right, is I think where they are. Or is it California? It's hard to tell. They're on USC for part of the movie, the USC campus, so I'm not sure if they actually even mention where they are. But
somewhere in America.
Somewhere in the basement of a church, there's a locked room that leads down into these ancient catacombs, and they have a big glassish pillar of like fluorescent churning green liquid. And it's surrounded by crucifixes and pews and all this stuff. Essentially, it's the devil. But the devil is not, as we find out from this dead priest's writings, what we think of as like an angel fallen from heaven or so. They're essentially aliens, right? The Satan was some sort of alien, and Christ was another alien who was more humanoid, and he came to stop Satan. And this is how they sort of contained him, was in this tube. And then they said, we're going to just use the Catholic faith as basically create Catholicism to hide this until humanity has science capabilities that can help them dispose of or contain or control whatever the case is with this mystery goo Satan.
So this is just an origin movie for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? And it's
right.
Shredder in the vial.
This is TRI, and this is going to spill into the sewer, and it's going to be a rat. It's going to be amazing. Splinter is it's great. Yeah, no, it does look like a giant vial of the mutagen from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the set and everything is great. It's filmed in an abandoned warehouse. I guess it used to be used as a ballroom. And like I said, they film a couple of college scenes at USC. That's the premise of the film. The actual like plot and action involves this priest going to a college and recruiting a mythology professor who's he's well known. He was in Big Trouble in Little China as well. Victor Wong. He also, well, I remembered him from Grandpa in Three Ninjas and the Three Ninjas series. So maybe he's as recognized by our generation for that. But he plays the mythology professor, who's shockingly similar to a mythology professor I had in my undergrad. And I guess he's a mythology professor, but he's actually a physicist, right? So he's teaching advanced physics and quantum theory. And he is approached by the priest to take some of his really talented grad students and basically find out how to stop this thing from potentially breaking free and causing terror in the world in the next couple of days. It seems we don't really understand the timeline here or why this is happening at this time. A lot of the details are foggy or left out. But what happens is, of course, the thing ends up taking over some people and doing spooky things. And it's really a mishmash of religious horror with this science fiction element. And it also serves as John Carpenter's bridge in what he calls his, I think he calls his Armageddon trilogy or Apocalypse trilogy, which started with the Thing remake and then Prince of Darkness and then afterwards In the Mouth of Madness. So it's like the Thing is very science fiction, In the Mouth of Madness is very religious, and this is like the bridge in the center. I'm wondering if either of you had seen this. Mandy, had you seen this film before?
No, I had not seen this film before.
Greg?
Definitely not.
Although I think I had seen the giant canister of mutagen at the Children's Museum, because there's definitely a spinny, glittery, light, weird thing just like it.
Yeah, we all, turns out,
yeah.
In grade school, we all made Satan by having 2 soda bottles
Exactly.
make tornadoes.
I'm glad they keep it there for future generations to enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, they gotta keep it somewhere, I guess.
So the first thing that I think is important to note for listeners is some people have an aversion to mixing science with supernatural stuff, whereas others love it, and especially in this day and age where we have so many TV shows about the paranormal with people bringing out EMF detectors and homemade devices like the Ovilus and things that are of I mean, I'm a believer, but I'm also, I will call that dubious science at best. This is sort of the prototype of that. You know, it's Ghostbusters-ish, like it's science, but also they don't bother explaining a lot. There are a huge number of 80s tropes in this movie, which is what I noticed. For example, every single science-y thing has to be in this movie at that time. There are computers everywhere when they go to the abandoned place and set it up. There's one lead character, the female lead, who is played, and the reason I haven't really mentioned a lot of the leads is because, except for Donald Pleasence and Victor Wong, everyone else is sort of a body count situation. There are just a lot of people there. They do have some personality, but no one has a really large role versus a really small role, except for maybe Jameson Parker as Brian, the male lead, and Lisa Blount as Catherine, the female lead. I think they, at one point in time, the character of Catherine is mostly just there to enter differential equations in an old black and green computer for a huge chunk of her screen time after the intro. And these equations are supposedly translated from, you know, a Latin text, which is, of course, pre our understanding of differential equations. And I guess their thought is aliens as opposed to like, oh, Islam or like other pre, you know, that's not really pre-Christ, that's post-Christ, but there are other, you know, Aramaic things that have gotten close, we've discovered. But I thought that was interesting. They're like, no white people were there, must be aliens. But
well, I love as opposed to Dennis Dunn's role, which apparently is just to ask, I think it's Ann Yen over and over, whether or not she's Asian. Like, I think he does it like 3 or 4 times, and they're both clearly Asian. Like,
yeah, I didn't understand that. So Ann Yen, I think she does a great job as Lisa, the she's translating the Latin and Hebrew and things like that.
It was really nice. They both did a good job, and to have two principal Asian actors in this film.
For sure. Yeah, and also I actually think the most amazing acting job in this is who is the character? There's so many characters. I'm not kidding when I'm like, no, really, it's not that I'm forgetting names. It's that I couldn't possibly remember all of the names.
Yeah, this was definitely an ensemble thing. And I'm sorry, I completely discredited Victor Wong. So 3 principal Asian actors.
Yeah, it's and I don't know. I hate to say if it's Robert Grasmere or I should know this anyway, there's a large black actor. I think it is Grasmere.
Oh yeah, he was.
He's phenomenal. He has very little screen time, but he's one of the ones that becomes possessed. And when he does, I mean, his face, he's just covered in sweat, and he's a very large, like huge, tall person. He has like his face exhibits this dual capacity for like possession and this sort of evil intent with this horrible like fear and trying to fight it off as his body does completely unrelated things. So his body is doing the task that he's being forced to do, but his face has this entire story playing out on it, and it's remarkable. And there is that weird scene that I think in contemporary time does bring discomfort when he's walking up the stairs when he first gets possessed, and he's like singing, what is it, Bridge Over Troubled Water, or I can't remember what gospel-y song he's singing.
Yeah.
Amazing Grace. He's singing Amazing Grace, I think, as he's walking up the stairs. And I'm like, man, the one black actor in this is screeching gospel as he's coming up the stairs. But again, he plays it so well that he was a standout for me, even though he only had a handful of scenes.
Well, yeah, like you said, I think unlike the other people who kind of play possession as like, I am fully possessed, now I'm catatonic and I'm just kind of doing things and I'm like the banality of evil. He plays kind of this this troubled guy who he's laughing in most of the scenes, and like you said, he's profusely sweating, and it reminded me a lot of Get Out, and kind of that performance of, you can see behind the eyes the abject terror.
Yeah, that's a good case. He's living it in this role. Like he's in it. That's really awesome. There's also so Susan Blanchard is in this as well. She's been in many, many things. Falcon Crest. She was in They Live also, and lots of TV.
Can I just say for Susan Blanchard, I don't know if it was her choice or her agent, but the fact that her IMDb picture is her from this with her face completely destroyed, like, what a choice.
Exactly. So, and it might be, who knows, it might be because it's her, I think it's her most well-known role, but
and a sense of humor.
Sure. She's kind of just she's just the mom that wanders around and checks on everyone in a couple of scenes, and then she doesn't feel well and she has a mark on her arm, and that of course is like the mark that she's been chosen by this green Satan. And so she ends up getting possessed, but as she's getting possessed and going through this weird birth that doesn't result in a birth, instead it drops down and her skin starts to peel off, and she has these disgusting teeth. Her face is essentially just peeled skin and raw red, and she just smiles, and she kind of looks like a flayed Maria Bamford, like when she's with the bangs and everything, when she's this possessed thing. But she does great. Once she's possessed, she's a totally different person. She doesn't even say anything. She has telekinesis and throws people around and possesses people. And then they have this cool scene, the effects are something to talk about. She has this cool scene where near the end, she's trying to, I guess basically they're like, well, this is Satan or Satan's son, and he's trying to bring through the actual father, Satan father, through the mirror. It's all very murky. But she goes to this mirror in the climax, and she reaches through the mirror, and there's like this demon hand reaching out to grab her hand on the other side so she can pull it through, presumably. But the way they did it is they actually used mercury that they drained from the hydraulics in a lot of their camera equipment to do this effect where she reaches into the mirror. And it's a fantastic effect. I I thought that was crazy that they apparently took the hydraulic fluid out to do it. I would have imagined that you would have just gotten mercury, but I guess it is a toxic substance. I don't know how in '87 how difficult it was to get, especially that quantity. But that was an interesting little factoid. The effects around the board are, I mean, they're good, but this is not the thing. This is not a super effect heavy. It's more set dressing with a few effects.
Yeah, and I thought the effects are very interesting because they're all very like practical.
Yes.
Like you could see that they were simple, and maybe it was like camera angles versus like expensive setups that made it look like what they wanted it to look like the water in the ceiling, like simple, but like reverse exactly. And I really actually enjoyed that. I felt that it made it like in some ways more like accessible or a suspension of disbelief because it just obviously looked very real.
Yeah, it did look really good. Going back to the Satan in the mirror thing, kind of an off topic, but did either of you ever see The Adventures of Mark Twain from 1985? It's like a stop motion film. I was thinking about that because I looked up to make sure it was 1985 and this was 1987. So in Adventures of Mark Twain, there's a scene where these two kids go through a mirror and they're on like the moon or somewhere weird. And there's this weird thing in a mask and they're like, "Who are you?" And it like whispers like, "I'm Satan," at them.
It's
and
the
I
most
kind of
disturbing children's film ever created by man. And it is an absolute must watch for cult film fans. So look it up.
Yeah, but I just that weird little parallel of like, oh, like they step in this mirror and kind of this eternal darkness that Satan lives in that kind of feels like outer space, and I just like, kind of that just coincidental parallel.
Yeah, and I mentioned before we started recording the fact that this is definitely where one of those times where the scriptwriter, who is John Carpenter in this case, using a pseudonym, said, "All right, I want this to be science film and a horror film, but I'm going to do my best to tiptoe around specifics because I know that I will get it wrong." And I think for the most part, he does a good job. I mean, because there's this really cool line Victor Wong's character has, and I'm not going to get it exact, but he's talking to the priest, I think, and he says, or maybe he's talking to one of his students, but he's like, I think he's talking to one of his students, and his students is basically like, "This is bullshit. This can't happen." And he goes, "Everything you know breaks, all the laws of gravity and physics break down when you get small enough. And then it's just ghosts and shadows." And of course, he's referring to quantum physics, which is of course even more in vogue now in like, what do they call it? Commercial science for the masses like me, who I'm not a scientist. Mandy has some background in engineering and much more science than I do. But quantum physics, it is true, right? Like we're learning that when things get small enough, they no longer behave in the way that they normally would. And it was interesting for me to hear some of this little snippets of this kind of talk in theory in 1987 when it's just now becoming popularized in the fun science books and things like that that the layperson is meant to read. And he does a good job. The part where it breaks down is when you get into the use of technology. Like I was mentioning, Blonde's character just like typing away at differential equations. I don't know what that was supposed to do. I don't know why that was happening. I don't know, is that supposed to be a ritual? There's so much going on and there's so many characters in this movie that it almost feels like nothing's happening. Because we check in for a second with a million different people and they're all essentially doing, I guess, something, but none of it is explained. Like, I don't know what these physics students are doing. They're mostly just poking computers with pencils and listening on things, but I don't know what they're listening to.
It's almost like Tron or that CGI show Reboot, where it's a bunch of people that know that computers are hot and cool and neat, and we don't really know how technology works, so I don't know, Satan. Yeah,
and they must have had, John Carpenter must have either been interested or had some sort of people that he talked to, because Susan Blanchard's character at one point comes down while they're poking the big tank, And it's like, I don't get it. What's the deal? Is it toxic? Why haven't we just taken a sample? And that's, I think, something very real thing. They'd be like, why wouldn't we have taken a sample? Even if it's toxic, we would be able to handle this. You know what I mean? Don't drink it, don't eat it, don't breathe it, don't let it, don't let it out. And that's sort of like the kind of thing that a person who is a scientist would say and want to do, and yet it's never addressed again. It's like, we brought it up, so that's okay, and then we move back. I also feel
they're like they also said like they couldn't open the container. I forget where that came in comparison to taking the sample inside. Yeah,
which is interesting, but it also, nobody notices that it's oozing goo on the ceiling for like 2 hours. It's this weird thing where this is what they're studying, and they don't properly explain why a group of science students and scientists are not losing their shit with excitement over this. Because this would make your career, right? Even if you don't believe it's Satan, this would make your career. So no one is like that. No one is excited. And it seems to me, because there is this oppressive atmosphere.
Like this movie was definitely made by not nerds.
Sure, exactly.
Like, when I was in college and in grad school, like the thing that people would talk about at parties was like the shape of airfoils and like differential equations, like what was going on. Like that is like, it was like you just couldn't stop nerding out, like even in social situations.
And maybe he's a mechanical engineer in her other life.
Right.
So she knows what she's talking about.
And like, like if you're like a nerd that's like going on to grad school to focus on specifically these kinds of things in physics, like you are gonna seriously nerd out. Like you're gonna be, oh, what is that movie? Was it not Silence of the Lambs, but like the other one?
Dragon?
Yeah, where they have like the bug guys that they like play chess with their bugs, and like that's what they're doing at like 11 o'clock at night on like a Saturday, like in the museum where they work or something. Like, yeah, like that is accurate. Like that is made by people that like probably are nerds. This movie felt like it was like, oh, like my brother has a computer and he like lives in my parents' basement and he just types all the time. And like, that's what nerds, like, that's like all the nerd culture that they knew. And then they put this together.
Like
is what it felt like to me.
The code in the Matrix scrolling down the screen.
Yeah.
Like, this is engineering, right?
This is
what computer scientists do. Totally. Yeah.
Let's listen to this clip. This kind of gets a little bit to that. This is from early in the movie. This is Jameson Park playing the student Brian and Lisa Blount playing the student Catherine in their meeting. And obviously, Jameson Parker's character, who, by the way, has an off-putting mustache in this film. I mean, he's a handsome man, very fit. He looks great. And then they gave him, it's a very robust mustache. And I can't figure if it's real or applique. But it's just, I'm like, it must have hit at like that 6 months in the 80s when it was required that your lead character have a mustache, because otherwise I don't understand, because no one else has it. It's not appropriate. But this is them talking outside in the campus at USC.
Some things aren't changed by quantum physics, though.
Such as?
Well, for instance, every theoretical physicist I know wonders why it is that no one who looks like you ever seems to settle down in our end of the building.
That's not true, and that's an extremely sexist thing to say.
Confirmed sexist. I'm proud of it. Hey, I was just joking. What happened? You talk numbers, you get romantic. You talk people, you clam up.
This to me was such, I'm a straight white male, but it's such an insane, it misses the mark on every level of how to address sexism in the world and in films. It's like John Carpenter said, hey, we have to make, like, she has to acknowledge it, that's sexist, because that's sexist. But he's really cool, so he's gonna say that, ha ha ha, yeah. And then he's gonna gaslight her and say, what are you doing? Things were getting romantic when you were talking numbers, but you can't talk about people. Is that why you don't like me? Because you can't talk about people, blah, blah, blah. And this is the beginning of their romance. It's the weirdest, like, missed thing. I didn't get it. It was the whole thing where I'm like, the movie, I found these two characters perhaps the the least approachable in the film. Everyone else, we get little snippets of them, even if they're cold or just normal or used car salesman type guy who just walks in because he's renting equipment and people. Like, everyone has a little bit of, I'm like, oh, these are real people. These two, I did not understand at all.
Yeah,
I just didn't get it.
Yeah, I forgot until like the very end of the film. Like, oh right, we're supposed to be engaged in their romance when like she sacrifices herself or whatever. I'm like, oh right, and then I tuned it out again immediately and forgot about it until you brought it up.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, we will do spoilers, but again, this is not the kind of movie where there's a big twist. Nothing in this movie is surprising. So when you watch it for the actors you like. You watch it for John Carpenter's atmosphere and his skilled use at limited resources to create something that looks pretty expensive for the most part. You don't look for the plot, because really what happens is Donald Pleasence, who is top billing in this, and he's working with him because, of course, was a fundamental part of the success of Halloween, John Carpenter's biggest success. He really doesn't even have a role here. He's there in so many scenes, and he says a couple of lines, but he does nothing. And at the end, he is the priest, and he retreats, and instead of helping everyone, he hides behind like a boiler, reading passages from the Bible, which he feels fairly discredited because of these revelations about what the devil and Christ really were. And then the demon lady possession is trying to pull her devil dad through the mirror. And at that point, that's when Lisa Blount's character runs and knocks her and the demons into the mirror. And then the priest throws an axe and crashes the mirror. Now, that's how it stopped, I guess, right? Is that they both go into the mirror and then he shuts, I assume, the portal. Well, then we get this obnoxious scene at the end where they're wheeling out, I guess he's injured. I don't know why they're wheeling him out, but they're wheeling out Donald Pleasence's priest character, and he's like, I stopped it. And I don't know if this is Carpenter trying to like read Catholics for filth, because like it kind of feels that way, but he doesn't acknowledge it. I'm like, is this guy actually supposed to be a hero? He's really a non-entity in this film. And so I
actually rewound and like rewatched like that section. I'm like, did I miss something? Did he actually do something? Like what is nope, he didn't. I did not.
I mean, I guess that's something. But he says, I did it. I'm like, no. You broke a mirror. The other chick is in the hell realm with some interdimensional demons. And like, and that's just how we leave that, I guess. And I don't know. I just didn't really know. I guess I didn't know what to take about it. It's like, I almost would like some sort of sequel to this film just so I could feel like there was a wrap up. Because there is this little bit at the end where I guess there's just too many elements and none of them are actually factored into the plot. It's like he had a lot of ideas and concepts and like, oh, this is going to look cool. And he's actually said in the past that this was his most visually controlled project. He had the most hands-on. He's like, every single shot is exactly what I wanted and how I envisioned it. It feels that way. It doesn't feel like the really quick, one take and we'll move on stuff that he does with a lot of his budget productions, like everything from his early work to Vampires with John Bon Jovi. It doesn't feel like that. But it's that whole style over substance. Like, I think style can be substance and it can augment substance, but there's not substance here. We just get a bunch of cliches with cool visuals crammed in. There's also illogical scenes, which are always problematic in this, that could have been remedied without like lazy scripting. And some things have to be changed when you film. I think a lot of people who haven't been involved with film don't understand this very well because you don't have to think about it. When you write a script, you don't know what the building's going to look like. You don't know where the rooms are that you're going to do these things. You don't know the logistics of how certain things are going to play out. So those get changed as you film. One key example is in this one. At one point in time, Dennis Dunn's character is locking himself in a broom closet off of the room where a couple of possessed women and Susan Blanchard's character is transforming. So he can't leave. But on the other side of like a brick wall to him is where everyone else is holed up. And so they take a board and start to rip open the wall to try and get to him. Well, okay, I get it. But he's yelling at them to keep going, and he doesn't start to dig at all. He doesn't dig at all. He just stands there like, come on, save me. And then it gets near the end where he's like he thinks he's gonna be attacked, and he's like, hurry up. And then he starts digging. I'm like, dude, that's not logical. No one would do that. And it's just, yet we watch it, and it's for minutes. Like this, it's just, there's no way you could have watched this or had this play out and not been like, it doesn't really make sense that he's not doing that. And there's actually one case that makes me think that there's a little more to the story with John Carpenter making this movie as to whether or not he had time or was a budget concern, because it was filmed in, I think, about 30 days, which is pretty quick for a big budget, not so quick for an indie, but it's brief. And someone on staff had said, like, you know, we have 7 zombies, basically, possessed people. What if we had them somehow represent each one the 7 deadly sins? And he's like, well, we'd have to change the script. We're not changing the script. And that could just be true because, you know, you're already filming. But also it makes me think that his mindset was, I am done with the script. I will do nothing more to this script. We will film what is here and we will move on. And I think that does sort of feel that way, because it's sort of, if people think Videodrome has sort of an open ending where you don't know what's going to happen and what really happened, this film is hella open. Like, there's all these
needlessly open.
Needlessly, yeah. That's a good way of saying it. For example, one of the weird little things that's a cool idea, but it's kind of a trope with cursed objects, you know, in these movies, is that people who sleep near the vial have the same dream, and it's like a videotaped looking message of a shadowy figure in the mouth of the church, and it's saying something in staticky voices. It's creepy. It's very They Live, and it actually was filmed on videotape and then filmed with film on the screen of a television to get that effect. So that's why it looks that way, and it is effective. Very techno kind of vibe. That, of course, then they all have that dream, which really means nothing, we think. But then at the end, after Lisa Blount's character has gone through the mirror, then we have the scene where people have the dream and she's the figure in the doorway of the church. So it seems like there was an idea there. Like, was she the one that was somehow warning them or telling them what to do with those messages? Or is it different now because she's changed the future and that's the future? There's literally no explanation, and no explanation fits well enough to be better than another one.
And I guess I liked that personally. I kind of liked it in the same way I liked the ending of Kubrick's The Shining, where it's kind of like, I saw it as she's trapped there, and this is the film's way of telling us, you know, she wasn't warning them, she's not able to help them, it just, she is trapped in whatever this nightmare is. Mm-hmm. You know, kind of a downer end.
And that totally can be accurate. I think that the point, but to me it was too, like, I wanted there to be some sort of big thing because the dreams were such a small part and they entered so late in the game.
And they could have been really cool.
They could
have. I love that payoff of, like, kind of the twist at the end of showing, like, oh, like, she's trapped in the dream, or like you said, whatever it is, but they didn't dive into it enough.
I agree. Like, I would have loved to have people having the dreams. I would have loved to open with the dream in the movie and have people have, like, some other tie, because so often those are used as premonitions and things, and a big theme of the movie is that whatever's in this thing is reaching out to people, like, to their mind, and eventually, of course, possesses them and has telekinesis and things. But, like, that communication aspect is actually the coolest part of the movie to me, or the concept of the movie. But it really ends up being just boiled down to, I'm a monster. I'm an invisible version of the thing. It's going to cost a lot less money. You know, like
spitting in each other's mouths somehow to contract.
The super soaker.
How could we not mention this? So yes, the way that they infect another person is they open their mouth and a very fine stream of water, like, jettisons out into the other person's mouth.
What are those? The Dilophosaurus or whatever?
Yeah, it's another practical effect. This one I think is a little less successful than the others because we've all seen or done this. It's literally they probably just rented a dentist's thing and had it. It's a tube with pressure that shoots water that's taped to their cheek that you can't see, and it sprays next to it. So every scene of them spraying is from a profile. It's effective in the way that it's gross. It's weird, but we all know exactly what that effect is, and it's one of those that it's sort of like a spoiled effect because we can do it in our home with household items, like a spray bottle or whatever. So it sort of is, even if it looks exactly like what it would look like if they were jettisoning water out of their throat, we know it's an effect. So I didn't hate it because at least he had some sort of weird quirk with that. But,
I wanted it to be grosser, honestly.
How about, because I mean, the whole possession via vomiting is not new, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even much later, X-Files did it with the black liquid and things. So it could have been anything. And you could have also done it low budget. Like, there's also been the possession via kiss thing all the time. Make it gross. Have a bunch of that movie slime in the mouth when they start. Like, you could have done that. I don't know. They don't use it that effectively. Like, certain times their aim is spot on and they'll hit them from like across the room, and other times, like at the climax when everybody's basically bottlenecked in a hallway, I mean, you might as well have blindfolded a 5-year-old with a super soaker. Like, that's how accurate they were. Yeah, and that was the other thing. The staging of the finale is just a weird. I wish he didn't film it in this building. It could have looked like it was in this building, but you essentially have like a couple of rooms on one side of a building with a hallway connecting them outside of them, and everyone is bottlenecked. Like, there's at one point, I don't know, like 6 to 8 people in this one little like 20 by 10 hallway. It's just, there's no good way to make that work. And there was no reason for people to be moving to where they were. Like, one of the cool scenes is when
it would have been super rad if like that mirror was like down in the church or something, and they had like like a way bigger space and like more interesting set to work with and stuff, right?
How about the mirror? How about the priest is hiding behind the full-length mirror, and so he's on the other side while the demon is reaching into it. Like, there's all sorts of really cool ways he could have done this, and I just get the feeling that it was a rush job by the end of the production. And of course, who knows, they probably, they might not have filmed in sequence. Although if they drained a lot of equipment of hydraulic fluid, I'm sure that was a later scene. Sorry.
I was going to say, just going back to your point of John Carpenter saying, hey, this is the one film where I really got my vision unclouded. Maybe that's the problem. Whenever you see a film that you look at like, oh, the director is person A. Oh, the writer is person A. Oh, the so-and-so is person A. Like, the more often their name appears in the credits, the worse the movie's going to be, most likely.
Well, and I mean, and he's made some winners and some clunkers. Halloween, and I think it gets to the point too, when you're constrained so much, you can make something great. Like Halloween, I think Halloween is a phenomenal movie and one of the more phenomenal series. Although, when you go on as long as it does, there's some real rough ones. And speaking of which, the most recent Halloween that is a retcon of everything past the first movie, phenomenal. Can't wait for Halloween Kills next year. It's going to be great. But this is one of those cases where I agree with you. I think he was so tied to certain things that the story doesn't just suffer, it's non-existent. The visuals are what's important here. We stare at them a long time. The opening credit sequence is over 10 minutes long. To its credit, it's interspliced with some world building and character introduction, but very little. So it's like you're watching a fair amount of footage between the credits, but I'm not getting a lot of plot until the very end. The very beginning when the priest dies and Donald Pleasence gets the key, that's important. Seeing Victor Wong as the professor, that's important. And then everything else in there is completely unimportant until well after the credits. So this is a much loved film by a lot of horror buffs. I think that part of the problem in looking back in retrospect is I think that The Thing remake that John Carpenter did is a much stronger film, and In the Mouth of Madness is also a much stronger film. So when you have a slow-paced film that doesn't have much plot and doesn't have a very sensical plot, or a sensical ending, it's going to be hard to compete with that. I sort of think of Dario Argento's Inferno, where in his Witches trilogy, you know, you have Suspiria, which was his kind of early opus, and then you have Inferno, and then you have what's the final one? Lady of Tears. It's like, it doesn't matter if you hate the last one or love the last one. Everyone is kind of the same on the middle one, Inferno. It's interesting, you know. So I think it's got that middle child syndrome, and if you're not Empire Strikes Back, you're just a sequel. Is the way a lot of people see it. And I think this one suffers from that. I will say that there is a cool cameo by Alice Cooper as the head. Basically, one of the weird things that happens is they're all sequestered in this building is that homeless people, they imply they're schizophrenic people as opposed to just people who don't have homes. I'm sure that somebody is offended by this in this day and age, which I can understand. But they gather and sort of act like zombies outside of the building, and they end up killing a couple of the people as they leave later. But Alice Cooper has a featured cameo where he stabs the first victim of the movie with like a half of a bicycle. And that's actually, I guess, a prop that he used in some of his stage shows. And he wasn't actually originally going to be in the film. His manager was producing the film, and so he had met John Carpenter before, and he's like, hey, can I come watch some of the special effects? Because Alice Cooper, he's a stage performer that loves effects. They're like, yeah, sure. And he came on and he basically hung out so much that I guess Carpenter was like, you know, I want you in this movie. So that's kind of a neat thing. And Alice Cooper fans, he has a song called Prince of Darkness that plays in there for a little bit. That's a nice thing to see. And he's a good actor, and he has a very recognizable face, very long face. When you put some ghoul makeup on him, he fits right in. So let's wrap this one up. I'm gonna start on this one. I would recommend Prince of Darkness to anyone that has patience for slow pacing and likes the higher end budget 80s, 90s supernatural movies, because there's a certain flavor to this kind of late 80s, early 90s supernatural movie that fits right in with things like Poltergeist, and other things where they're easily accessible. Anybody can watch it and be like, oh, this is a fairly well-made film from a technical standpoint. I'm going to be able to watch this movie. Whereas a lot of the other 80s and 90s stuff that maybe people aren't interested in the mainstream are shot on video, real rough, bad audio, no effects, no name actors, all that stuff. If you can't get into that, this is going to be an interesting one, and it's going to prompt some discussion, especially if you come from a Christian religious household. Go ahead, watch it, and bring your engineer uncle so they can complain about all the pseudoscience. But yeah, and from a personal note, I enjoyed this movie. I was hoping for a little more. I hadn't seen this movie for, I don't know how long, maybe 20 years, and so I had different memories of it, and when I watched it again, I didn't find that it was as enticing as it originally was. But worth a watch, especially if you're a John Carpenter or a Donald Pleasence fan, although Donald Pleasence's role is really sadly minimized. Mandy, who would you recommend Prince of Darkness to, and why?
Oh, this is a hard one to recommend because, like I said, kind of dialing it in this week, and I felt like I didn't pay attention enough to understand what was going on, but like obviously like there wasn't a lot to understand. So it's just it wasn't all there. I agree with Nate, like the production value is part of a reason to watch it. Like it does look nice. I thought that it actually flowed pretty well, even though like the substance wasn't quite there. It is a slower paced film. I enjoyed the period costumes, which for them were probably like modern, very honest, but like it was a nice return to like the 80s, very true to the 80s look. And yeah, the ensemble cast was interesting. So I don't know, like a weird one, but we review a lot of weird films, so kind of like on brand for us. But yeah, hard to recommend it to like any specific group of people.
All right, fair enough. Greg, who would you recommend Prince of Darkness to, and why?
I mean, if push came to shove, if you're a John Carpenter fan, like a diehard fan, hey, here's one more in its wheelhouse. But I'll do my usual thing of, I would say if you haven't seen The Thing, just do that instead, or just skip this one and do In the Mouth of Madness, like you had said earlier, Nate. If you hate John Carpenter, but you kind of like the idea of like a religious or pseudo-religious horror film, 2015's The Lazarus Effect, I'd say do that one instead.
Little Olivia Munn in that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I liked it well enough, but the whole time I felt like it didn't go far enough, and I wanted something else.
And one thing I was mentioning it, or in addition, that I was watching for is I'm a huge Clive Barker fan, both especially his novels and short stories, but also his movies and the adaptations. And this felt like a Clive Barker light. Like it didn't quite get there. It doesn't have that depth of like sort of moral ambiguity and really dark pseudo mythology. It doesn't really have that. It wants that, and so it starts to scratch. But it's sort of like an entry level Clive Barker is maybe what I would call it. So. But again, maybe worth a watch. Take that into account. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to move on to Deathline, aka Raw Meat. All right, I know what you're thinking. I don't have a lot of money, Nate. It's still COVID times. Don't ask me for money. Okay, I promise I will not ask you for free money. What I will do is offer you awesome swag from Cult and Classic Podcast and the Cult and Classic Podcast family if you join our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/Cult and Classic Podcast. You can join for $1 a month and get exclusive videos of our episodes as well as extra content, or you can donate $5 and get an autographed art collector's card and some occasional other swag by the mail every month. Or if you really want to support us, you can do $10 a month and be a full drinker of the Cult and Classic Podcast Kool-Aid. You get the card, the free content, you get a zine every single month from Cult and Classic Podcast and our family, and you usually get some extra stuff every month too. These are really great benefits. They're creative, you'll like them, I promise, and it's totally worth it because, well, we love you and we need you, and we want to keep bringing you interesting conversations about films that you love and some that you don't even know about. Also want to give a shout out to a person who sent us some awesome stuff and swag for us. It is Uncle Mike's Pop Culture Market. That is Uncle Mike's Pop Culture Market. This was a cool collection of stuff that Uncle Mike sells. It's an all assortment of things from Goosebumps books to Creeps magazine to, I'm looking at some of them right now, awesome action figures, VHS, DVDs, Blu-ray, all sorts of cool stuff. You never know what you're going to find from Uncle Mike's Pop Culture Market. How do you find Uncle Mike's Pop Culture Market? Go to Instagram and go to @uncle_mikes_pop_culture_market. That's Uncle Mike's Pop Culture Market with underscores between the words. Pop culture is one word. Totally worth it. Great person to deal with. Super appreciate the swag sent to Cult and Classic. And if you guys want to shout out and have something that you want people to know, either anything you want, action figures, movies, whatever the case is, reach out to us at cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com, and we will see if we can help you out and give something cool to you guys, Fiends of the Pod. Thanks so much. And we are back, and we are going to talk now about the second film in this week's Pleasance episode, Raw Meat from 1972. So this is one that is much less known in the States than Prince of Darkness, and probably in the UK. It's not totally unknown. It's been released in the 2000s, I think 2 or 3 times on DVD and Blu-ray. But actually, I'm not even sure about the Blu-ray, but it's been released this decade. And I'm going to say this. It is an odd duck of a film. It's a horror film, but it really feels almost more like 2 films stuck together. It's like part sort of mutant cannibal film and part sort of cozy British detective film. And in it, there is just to get right to the chase, in a never finished, or rather a collapsed section of the London Tube, the late generations of miners who were trapped there and procreated over a couple of, I think 3 generations, are snagging people from the tube system and eating them. And we arrive on the scene when a prominent government official is snagged and disappears, and he's of course been eaten. And turns out the mutants, there's only one left. We actually enter as his pregnant partner dies. So we have this sort of verbal mutant character who is humanish in the it's not the sewers, but it feels like the sewers to us United States folk, who is sort of lashing out because he's the last one of his kind. And in the middle of it, we have Donald Pleasence as Inspector Calhoun and his partner, Detective Sergeant Rogers, played by Norman Rossington, both, of course, well-known British folk in the acting world. And then we also have Sharon Gurney as Patricia Wilson and David Ladd as Alex Campbell, the American student who is Sharon Gurney's character's boyfriend. They are there to sort of be the first ones to witness a guy disappearing. They don't actually see him taken, but then she gets taken near the end. The reason it's hard to sort of put this in words is because this is another film, sort of like Prince of Darkness, where it really, the plot doesn't move along because of actions of the characters. It actually just moves along sort of by random chance. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, because it seems like Detective Calhoun is a good detective, Donald Pleasence's character. He's a funny detective. He also speaks, everyone speaks in such a natural British cadence in this movie, because they're all British, except for David Ladd, that I had trouble understanding some of their lines. It's definitely probably just my American ears. But what I did understand was pretty good dialogue and some funny stuff, which is a weird juxtaposition with the really gruesome, depressing life that the mutant is leading. And I guess my point is I expected the detectives to actually detect something and solve the case, but they don't. What actually happens is the girlfriend, Sharon Gurney's character, gets abducted by this mutant to be a meal, and then he decides a mate. And David Ladd, as the boyfriend, goes to Donald Pleasence and he's like, yeah, we'll get to it tomorrow, because he's hungover. And so David Ladd goes in the tube and finds her himself. And then, of course, Donald Pleasence is like, oh, shit, like, he's going down there. We're going to go. And so then they wind up there at the same time as David Ladd rescues his girlfriend and beats up the mutant. But no one resolved the plot through wit or anything. It's not really a detective story in that way. It just happens to be co-starring, I guess, a detective character, right?
Right. So you said it like kind of moved along by like random chance. I felt it like moved along by like bureaucratic, like.
Oh, that is true.
You know, like outcomes. Like it just like it was turning the crank of bureaucracy almost. It was super slow. Yeah. People were following like their like status quo kind of, and it just like, oh, stuff kind of eventually happened and people were bumbling along and like pushing the paperwork, and people were living their lives and stuff randomly worked out to turn into a movie.
It's kind of true, because the bureaucracy is an interesting point, because we get it all the way throughout the film, right? Like, in fact, let's listen to this clip. This is the first scene Donald Pleasence is in. He's arrived at his office, and he sits down at his desk, and this scene opens with him yelling Marshall, which is his secretary.
So,
Coming, sir.
go on, Rogers.
There's a report of a funny incident at Russell Square Tube Station.
Yes, sir?
Tea.
Oh, sorry, sir. I had to get some more tea bags.
Tea bags? You've been using tea bags?
They're standard issue now, sir.
Ha! I've been blaming the Indians.
Do you still want some, sir?
Yes, of course I want some.
Very good, sir.
I love this scene because, of course, it's like quintessentially British that he's complaining about not using loose leaf tea. But then also, like, later on, when he's hungover and he's talking to David Ladd's character, and he's like, you gotta help me get her. And he's like, we will go as soon as it opens in the morning and check out whatever's there. And like, as he's talking, he's stirring his tea, and then he just lifts the tea bag out in a spoon, and he's like, as he finishes his sentence, the guy turns around and leaves, and he just flings the tea bag behind him against the wall, and like puts his back in. Like, it's just this, the character, like, I actually would have really enjoyed seeing Donald Pleasence's and Norman Rossington's characters in a sort of mid-century Sherlock Holmes style film. I would have liked seeing them just play out their role and find like a murder or something like that, because this to me felt like this was not the case for them. This was something, I don't even know, this was a true bizarreness. But getting back to your
point, that like, what was that? I'm sorry, what was the superhero movie where it's like the superheroes on their day off, you don't see them doing any superhero stuff? Like, was not the day to film a movie, but I can't remember. Not Mystery Men. But anyway, that's kind of what I was like, these were like, it was not their case, like you said.
Yeah, like it felt like a weird, like it felt like two scripts were hammered together. And this film, by the way, I mean, especially in the 70s, we had with video nasties and things, the British government was pretty heavy-handed on censorship. So this film was cut down heavily. We watched the full version, which has a tiny bit of nudity and pretty great gore effects in this film, practical effects. We see a lot of the mutants, like basically meat room, where he just like throws the bodies. They actually drink blood. And actually, the logic of the script I found pretty good, because I was like, why is he like, why are there bodies in there? If they were eating people, they wouldn't waste so much. And then we learn that they have a deficiency. And essentially, it would make them crave iron. So the drinking blood starts to make sense. And there's little things like that throughout that kind of are interesting things. And the police do learn things after the mutants, they call him the Man, after his partner dies, he goes on a little rampage and attacks 3 men in the tube. And like they learn other things about him genetically because he gets hit and his blood as well. So there are interesting things in there. But again, they don't really have much to do with the plot because we kind of understand already what's happening. But the bureaucracy thing you mentioned, I like that, which I hadn't really thought of. It runs through the whole thing, all the way from the tea bags being standard issue to when they're trying to, they go and they break in essentially to the first victim who is working for some sort of government defense. When they break into his apartment, we get a cameo from Christopher Lee, which was an odd little thing. Who tells him to get lost, and so they sort of then they go get drunk because they're essentially off the case until the monster attacks those 3 other people, which are normal people, and all of a sudden he can go mess with the case because. So it is interesting. The bureaucracy really does stop them midway through, which I hadn't thought of. I want to talk a little about this Christopher Lee scene, because of course Christopher Lee, most famous for playing Dracula, among other roles in Hammer films, Dracula movies, as well as Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequels, and so many other things. He actually, well, let's listen to this clip. This is Donald Pleasence and Norman Rossington's character, the sergeant, in this dead guy's apartment, even though they haven't found the body. And all of a sudden, Christopher Lee's character, who's an MI5 operative, shows up.
If someone is reported missing in my manor, that's my business.
Your dainty little footsteps are echoing in places where one is well advised to tread lightly.
Are you threatening me?
You're very perceptive. Beyond even your well-known working-class virility. Why don't you go back to planting pot on people?
This was an interesting scene, especially for a cameo, because in that pause, it's because Donald Pleasence leaned forward and mouths "fuck you" to him, which was weird in this kind of movie because it feels like a detective cozy in most of it. So to have that expletive in there, and then to have Christopher Lee tell the police officer to just go back to planting pot, that was a it felt like a rule-breaking scene for British cinema at the time. I mean, there were, of course, other British films who really pushed the envelope, but that was unusual. So that was an interesting scene. Also, the scene is visually bizarre because they're clearly not being shot at the same time. It's literally split down the middle shot. So we get Donald Pleasence and Norman Rossington to one end, of the screen, and then you flip and you have Christopher Lee in the other. I assumed it was because they couldn't film on the same days, but I looked it up. Apparently that's not true. The actual issue is that the director of this movie, who is Gary Sherman, he also did 1981's Dead and Buried, which I think is a more successful film on the whole. He didn't want to have to deal with the logistics, especially, it makes sense in an actual apartment, which was small, of filming the height difference, because Christopher Lee was 6'5", and Donald Pleasence was only 5'6". So that's, a pretty big difference. It's essentially a foot difference. And filming them, I think it could have been done interesting, because it is, that's a very striking image, right? But he didn't want them to seem that off par. I guess he didn't want that sort of intimidation physically as well as verbally. Interesting choice. I probably would have done it, but it looks like the kind of thing when they filmed them in 2 separate occasions, but it isn't. And you can see that it isn't actually when Donald Pleasence and his partner's character leave the apartment, because we see an actual Christopher Lee sitting down in the chair, which then makes sense, because I was like, that's a pretty good lookalike if it's not Christopher Lee. Well, it is actually Christopher Lee. So they were actually there. The other interesting thing about that is that Christopher Lee was originally in line for Dr. Loomis in Halloween and turned it down, and Donald Pleasence got it. And Christopher Lee apparently regretted it. But he really liked Donald Pleasence's work, and he wanted to be in a role with Pleasence, which is interesting, because now that I think about it, that's in reverse, because this film is pre-Halloween, which was, I think, 1978. So that little tidbit can't be 100% factual that I found. Donald Pleasence is, of course, working before this, so it's very likely that Christopher Lee did want to work with him, but it wouldn't have been because of Halloween. So interesting that if you've heard that from me or somebody else, it's not totally correct. So I've talked about some of the things I like about this movie, but some other problems. There's the elephant in the room is this movie is really, really slow. I think in a similar way to Prince of Darkness, this week we had 2 really dragging films. This movie is 2 separate films crammed together, as I said, and neither of them are quick moving.
I say neither of them are good either.
I personally, I actually did like it. Here's what I'll say about the horror part. I actually felt for the man character, the mutant, because we watch him killing the first victim and draining the blood over his we'll call her the bride, the woman's mouth, as she's clearly sick during childbirth. And when she dies, he sobs, and he doesn't speak English completely, so he's just sobbing. And I was like, to me, that touched home. And then he ends up putting her in essentially the family plot, which is the other room of their apartment chambers, which is just all the bodies from 3 generations, and each of them has some little keepsake that he places on them. I thought it was a very sort of weird Clan of the Cave Bear mutant post-apocalyptic vibe feeling, and I liked that. And I like the set. It's actually it's not a in the film. It's a closed off station that was, people were left to die, which is why MI5 doesn't want them to go in there, because it's sort of a black mark on their record, apparently. But it's actually just an unfinished station. The station was never finished, and now it's used, I don't know if it's still present, but it was used to film movies and made way more money than the station ever could have made as an active station. But it's a cool set, and it works really well, and I like those scenes, but they take place almost entirely separate of the rest of the movie. The only difference, the only time they combine is near the end, when we get this really freaky, ugly scene where Sharon Gurney's character finally escapes the maniac, and he communicates with her. The only thing he says is a really muffled version of "mind the doors," because that's the only thing that the train attendants say audibly over the speakers the whole time in the tube, which is an interesting touch. She rebuffs him, and he's being really very gentle, and then it's like he just breaks it and he tries to rape her. And it was a choice that, I don't know, you wondered if it was coming, but I'm like, that seems like a very weird choice for that mutant character after he'd not done that. I don't know. I felt like it was a weird, for a character that doesn't speak, in intelligible words, I felt that was a weird turn for him to do, because he could have raped her back at his pad, essentially, if that's his character. Yet he seemed very attached to his bride, who was pregnant. So grooming her, I understand, to be his bride, that's clearly his intent, but then just not being able to take it, like, it makes you, it changes it from being like, this guy lived in a world where his family were the only people that mattered, and now it turns out, oh, he's just a rapist, and who knows, that other mutant could have just been one of his victims. We don't know. And it seemed like it seems too late in the game to turn what little understanding of that character we had on its head.
And I guess I had no sympathy for the mutant in the tube. When his the woman dies and he has that kind of, you know, meltdown scene, I thought of more of Tommy Wiseau at the end of the room, kind of walking around, kind of haphazardly pushing stuff off the shelves, and you know, it's like 5 minutes of this guy in this tube, like just yelling and then kind of hitting things haphazardly and not really, not like, just directionless. And I think I just kind of, my suspension of disbelief snapped as soon as we kind of saw, like you said, he just this kind of caveman rapist thing. And like, what he made, like, maybe he grew up there, maybe, and like his parents were the survivors of this cave-in, but like, what, they raised him that, like, oh, like the sun, like, is dangerous to us and we don't speak, and I couldn't follow it, and I didn't want to.
Well, and I think, and that's the thing, you didn't want to, because I get that, because it is slow, and it's, because the logic.
And maybe that's it. Is I didn't give the movie a chance, and I'll put that on me. But I don't think the movie.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to make it through.
Yeah.
I'm more on Greg's side. I'm like, it didn't serve it up to me in an easy manner. I needed like some slow balls over the middle of the plate this week, and like, that's not really what I got with either of these explaining themselves. So
they don't explain it at all, right?
Right.
The way we understand the plight of these people is little bits that people tell the detective, but the people telling the detective don't know about this mutant, so they don't make any of the connections, and so nothing is given to the audience, because essentially, I feel the logic kind of checks out, and it kind of surprised me that it did, but I had to think about it, like, and I will say this, the movie has enough slow parts that I had time to think about it. It was, because the idea is, it's about 100 years so that's probably 3 generations. So
okay, and I can buy that a little more, but still,
well, like 3 generations, and then you're like, well, why did they just? Because they can't leave, right? Because that was the whole point, is they were caved in. I'm like, oh wait, okay, they didn't kill people until later generations, because they've caught this plague, and they named the plague and they talk about it, that makes them desire the blood, essentially iron. Until later generations. So the first generation didn't have it. Maybe the second had it. Probably not, because it doesn't look like it's doing them any favors. It looks like it's killing them. And then you get this one. So it could be that it's just this final last 2, or however many were of this final generation, that finally were able to claw their way out of this little, because there's one little slit in the cave-in where they can crawl out of. And then they killed for food and blood and whatever. The problem with that is that rats have blood too, and we know that he kills and probably eats rats, because we watch him do it when they're attacking, which is weird. They're not attacking Sharon Gurney's character; they're rats. They're crawling around her, if this were a true story. So it's an interesting. I found that the logic checked out, but again, that's a lot to ask of the audience when there's no impetus carrying the plot, you know, and carrying your attention from the plot. Like I said, nothing happens because of the skill or adeptness of any character. The only character that has a clear, like, routine or mode of action is the mutant, because essentially he loses the only other person he knows. He, in a fit of rage, attacks and kills some people, and then he has nothing. He spends time, and then we see him get water and then break down crying again. And then he goes out to kill and presumably get someone for blood, and he finds the woman, and he takes her back, and you know the formula that goes on in his head, like, woman, oh, this is a new family, whatever. So I understand him through this film, but Donald Pleasence and the police are slow and they don't have anything to go on.
They were just literally playing the police. Like, that felt very accurate.
Also, we never see them go. Yeah, we never see them actually go to the tube until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you're trying to find clues, but in the movies we always, of course, see usually like, oh, the detective goes down himself and looks at the scene. In this, it almost feels a little more realistic, where he's like, he didn't even go to the scene. He
argues over tea.
Right, and then he asks about and then he has the police officer who is stationed there come up. If you really wanted it, wouldn't you have gone there? And there's some other things involved in that, like there's a lot of red herrings for the police that we know aren't true, which is a weird thing, because we know that this first victim who worked for the government was not killed because he was selling secrets or anything clandestine like that. He was killed because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time by an evil mutant. And they're trying to figure out why he's taking public transport when he's a high-profile figure. And it's because in the opening scene, we see that he's visiting sex clubs. So like strip clubs and whatever. So it's just these random things occur to make it look like these other things. But we as the audience already know that's not the case. So it's weird to make us watch the detectives go through these these hoops. Whereas I feel like if you restructured, because I don't think the dialogue is particularly terrible. I actually think it's fairly strong. And you had a pretty solid cast for a movie that is fairly not known. Especially a Christopher Lee cameo should get you on a lot of shelves in the collecting community. But it's just, I don't like, you could have restructured it. This could have been an actual mystery. Instead, it's not a mystery. We already know exactly what's happening pretty much. We get a little more details that we don't really need, like the diseases and stuff. But it's kind of anticlimactic to get there when you know from the very beginning what the hell is happening.
You know what? I think it kind of goes back to something you said about Prince of Darkness, and since these are Donald Pleasence films, both of them, it feels like this movie especially to me, didn't use what it had. You have Christopher Lee, you have Donald Pleasence, you have this really smart setup of something's happening on the tube and people are disappearing, and that's kind of a very primal fear of like taking public transportation, something that you have no choice in. And the police are interested, and, you know, watching this couple get accused of a murder that they're like, we tried to report like a crime. Like, why, why are you coming at us? And just kind of the terror of that. But we're maybe to channel a little bit of Jeff, I think the rewrite would be, don't show me anything about the mutant. I don't want to know anything about them. And then that way, when we kind of see, like, you know, they're trying to figure out maybe it's a serial killer, whatever, and then all of a sudden this crazed mutant comes out and grabs this woman, and we find out that, like, oh, there was like this cave-in, and like they've been living there, and it's like these. I
would have loved to have heard like the neighborhood rumors, because you know that there would have been like some alligator in the sewer kind of stories. Like, right? Like, I would have loved to see the police like canvassing the neighborhood and like collecting these stories a little bit at a time, like little details, and like building it up.
Right? Like everything, you're right, everything is in place. And that would have been really that would have been fantastic. In fact, that would be a great remake of some kind. But again, when you already know the premise, you're like, you sapped everything from me in a way. And that's why so the original film title is Deathline.
Which is a much better title.
It is a better title. Raw Meat is just clearly trying to get, it's trying to be exploitative to get some more viewers, which, I mean, I understand. And I will say again, there's a lot of gore effects that are pretty good that are weirdly used subtly. Like when we see the dwelling of the mutant, like there's disgusting bones and everything. Like it's well done. We also get in which they cut in the original release, the attempted rape scene. We see Sharon Gurney's breast, which was an issue for the censors at the time. And honestly, I mean, she's done nudity in other scenes or other films she's been in. She's actually a great actress. I think she's done some really good work, especially in the horror genre, but it just seemed unnecessary. I mean, because it's too real. The feel of the mutant scenes to me is too real to be titillating. It's not schlocky enough for it to be like, oh yeah, they're being attacked, but clearly this is a movie, like, and there's breasts, like, like it's too much for that. It's too real, and so for them to something that already felt weirdly inappropriate in this setup, like it would have been actually, like you're saying, Mandy, if you'd set it up that way, where the police are really trying to find what's happening, and Greg, you said, if you actually had the mutant, maybe he kills people, and then when they actually find him, he's actually not even threatening, right? Like it's a survival situation. Like it's more, like it just could have been so much more. And we do get this weird little thing at the end of this movie where David Ladd's character has saved his girlfriend. He's beat up the mutant. The mutant is dragging himself back to his home, and he goes and he lays next to the corpse of his fallen bride, the woman. And the police go in and find him, and Donald Pleasence is like, all right, you stay here. We're going to go get whatever else we need, the rest of the crew to come in here and help sort this out. And then after everyone's walked towards the camera in this long scene when the credits are starting, and Donald Pleasence and the rest are out of view, we're still staring down the same tube station. We hear the monster scream. And I mean, you're like, is it still alive? Like, is he then going to attack because there's only one officer in there or such like that? Like, it was an interesting little thing that in a movie like a Halloween or something, a little extra spook like that could have been effective. In this one, it's just more problematic because I was already struggling with the actual conclusion of the film as a whole. I think we can wrap this one up. I mean, again, there's neat things in this film, and everything is set to succeed. And we should say, too, I think this has something to do with it potentially. The director of this film, as I said, he's not unknown. He did Dead and Buried, which is a great film. Gary Sherman is his name. He had the story for this, but he didn't apparently write the screenplay. The screenplay was actually written by Siri Jones, who wrote a few television shows in Britain, but was actually primarily an ad executive. And this was the only feature length that Jones wrote. And I think that gels with this. I think that makes a lot of things make sense, because the writing for dialogue and setup and things like that seems strong. The idea is strong, but the execution of the actual narrative, which is the most difficult part of a writer's job, is what's critically lacking. And for someone to then have written the script that isn't a full-time, bloody knuckle, at the typewriter all day writer, that seems appropriate. That, the failure is in, you had a talented amateur, not even using that as an insult, but you had a talented amateur tackle a complicated project when you would have been better off having an experienced hack. You know what I mean? Because an experienced hack would have understood basic narrative structure to give you something that was at least paced well and probably has a payoff at the end. Whereas someone who's an amateur but really skilled at writing, it gives you dialogues and scenes that make sense and are coherent, but the whole package doesn't fit right. And so it's unsatisfying at the end. So that was my take on that one, on this raw meat, aka Deathline.
Kind of a Island of Dr. Moreau scenario where you just have someone that can't quite juggle all the balls.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it would have been nice to have somebody come in and do another pass through this script, someone else, and probably could have really worked this into shape. This is one of those movies, too, that, as we've talked about, because of the pacing, this is not a long film. It's an hour and 27 minutes. It feels like 2 hours.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that's a rough one. But wrapping it up here today for this episode, I'm going to start with you, Mandy. Mandy, who would you recommend Deathline to and why?
Ugh, nobody. If you want to watch a movie about, I'll steal Greg's thunder because he always recommends different movies. If you want to watch a movie about a mutant living in the abandoned tube station, watch V for Vendetta. Like it.
Yeah.
It's that guy in the base. He's doing the things. It's mysterious. But also the cops are doing the thing. Like I said, I would have liked to see more. There's a more organic unfolding curiosity, but also the bureaucracy that they're working with in that, and it had just like a much better, and it's British. So
That's interesting. I hadn't made that parallel, but of course there is also a woman abduction, and there are many points to duplicate on that. So interesting and fascinating choice. Greg, who would you recommend Deathline to, and why?
Well, Mandy stole my thunder because I'm not going to recommend this to anyone. I'm gonna instead recommend 2008's Midnight Meat Train, based off a Clive Barker short story, because it's basically the same movie. Midnight Meat Train does not have a great ending, but it's a much more engaging film, and you're at least curious until the end, and it pulls you in.
For sure, and it has Vinnie Jones in the lead role, and Bradley Cooper's got a little role in there too. So I'm gonna break rank a little here. I will recommend this movie if you like the idea of British detective films and this weird cannibal story. I think that individually they're mildly interesting. Together they don't work. But if you understand going in that you're going to watch an incomplete or imperfect narrative, give it a go. Also, if you're a Sharon Gurney fan or a David Ladd fan, they have some decent scenes. I want to give a shout out, to the script and Sharon Gurney's character for this one point. In the beginning of the film, Greg, you mentioned that the boyfriend girlfriend are sort of accused of maybe murdering this guy or something. By Donald Pleasence, and it seems like maybe he's just trying to rile them up to see if they'll give him anything, if there is something. But that's of course like the thing we all fear, right? That's why in the US so many crimes are unreported, because one, people are lazy and it's inconvenient and they don't think about other people. It's me on my soapbox. But two, because we don't always trust the police system and the ability of our justice system to prevent the just from being punished. And we get that here. But in that opening scene that causes them to go to the police in the first place, they pass the first victim collapsed on the stairs. And there is actually time, if you, like I did, painstakingly try and break down the narrative, where it seems as though this guy was actually attacked by the mutant. And then when the couple started to come, the mutant left. And he looks like he's just drunk, passed out on the stairs. And then when they leave, then the mutant drags him off. And that's why when they bring the cop back, he's not there. But when they see him on the stairs, the American, David Ladd, aka me, sees him and is like, he's just drunk, let's go. Like, what are you gonna do for him? But she's like, maybe he's having a heart attack. Maybe, like, check his pockets for a diabetic. Maybe he's a diabetic. Check his pockets for an alert card. Because yes, people, I don't know if they still do, but at the time, and other people as well with different conditions carry alert cards in their wallets. They actually check his wallet. It was nice to see a character that actually not only acknowledged someone, like a real person, as a hopefully a caring human being would, but actually used that bit of like, hey, we should check his wallet to make sure he's not a diabetic. We need to get something. Like, that was just a touch that right away I'm like, oh, that's unexpected. Unfortunately, it really doesn't have any play with anything. It just is a spot of realism in an imperfect movie. But I want to give a shout out to that, because I think a lot of films, they look at something like that and they're like, that touch of realism is too much effort. The payoff's not there. And in a way, they're right. But I do, as a viewer, like seeing things like that I didn't necessarily see. Like, for once, can we talk about where one of the characters has to take a dump in a zombie movie? Like, I mean, really, like, you could do something about that, because that's something that I would think about.
Did they do that in Zombieland?
They did. They did. So, I mean...
and possibly 28 Days Later?
I don't know if they did it in 28 Days Later. That is a great Danny Boyle film with one of my favorite characters of all time, Cillian Murphy.
I thought there was a scene where he goes in as like the first time the guy kills someone or something. Anyway, I like zombie films. These are like the things that I also am concerned about in the zombie genre.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, though, Nate. That was a very good scene, and then it just after that it starts to.
And I will say that I'm actually going to go back to Prince of Darkness 2 and just quick say, I actually like the music a lot in both of these films.
Yeah.
They're very
fair. I agree.
And of course, John Carpenter does his own music for most of his films. And anyone who loves the iconic Halloween soundtrack that he did will also like the Prince of Darkness. In fact, the Prince of Darkness is sort of just an elevated, slightly more complex version of Halloween's theme. So interesting there. And Rami has this really cool, trippy sort of, UK 70s music and the opening scene plays out like a 70s British psychedelic music video starring an old guy walking around porn places. So it's interesting, but again, imperfect. I will recommend this movie, as I said, to anyone who thinks that the combination of mutant, cannibal, and detective cozy film sounds interesting, because otherwise I just think you're not going to be able to make yourself watch it. You might be happy if you did, but most likely you're just going to be bummed if you did. So that's this week's episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. Oh, Mandy's got a point.
I remembered that superhero movie I was thinking of was called The Specials.
The Specials.
Like super awkward.
I vaguely remember that but
yeah.
I've not seen it. No, we'll have to check that out.
Yeah. It was weird. But it was like, like they're weird off not quite getting things together kind of.
Oh, James Gunn film?
Yeah.
Okay.
James Gunn film, yeah, that's right.
Very, very much like these poor detectives were having like that day.
James Gunn, by the way, if you're out there, and I know you are, please join us. I would absolutely love to pick your brain from your trauma days all the way to your Suicide Squad and Guardians success, which is absolutely well-deserved. Glad you're back where you belong. To play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. And as always, the clips we use are for review purposes only and are property of the copyright holders. And I want to say to you guys, again, join our Patreon at patreon.com/Cult and Classic Podcast, where you can get cool swag like zines, buttons, trading cards that are autographed to the artist and custom for Cult and Classic Podcast. Super great stuff. Also check out our updated website at www.cultandclassicpodcast.com. Thank you so much, and we love you. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.